Yeah, this is the last modules feedback session of 2023. So hoping to provide a bit of an update on where we are progress-wise. Demo, Daniel's going to run through of the GitHub auth interactions. Also, we've started recording a couple of issues related to modules. So just use the first two that we've created there as a starting point for talking about those on a sort of recurring basis. But just jump in with any questions as we go. So there's a number of CLs been landing since last time, since our call a couple of weeks ago. Just a reminder that all code is guarded effectively by QExperiment equals modules. And you can see that throughout all the tests as well. They have to enable QExperiment equals modules for this stuff to even work. The central registries GitHub-based authn and authz integration is working, and Daniel's going to, as I said, do a bit of a demo of that. Building out a minimal front end for the central registry interaction as well, where folks are using the central registry as opposed to, for example, a company OCI registry. QMod upload has been renamed to QMod publish, which sort of better reflects the nature of the fact that it's doing the upload and the tag, i.e. the publishing of the module at the same time. That sort of effectively allows us to split that into separate steps later. If actually we want to just do an upload but not the tag, because the tag is effectively the publish, the thing that makes it go live. Support for major version defaults and import paths. I've actually got another slide that I slipped in just before we started, so I can give an example of that in a second. We started work on Q login as well, and that's related to the auth for the central registry. So again, that's a central registry thing, as opposed to if you're using your own company OCI registry, then it will by default pick up the auth that you have in Docker config.json, just as all OCI tools otherwise do. And we've also implemented a first cut of modules caching within Command Q as well. So for downloaded modules and the expanded zip files, there's the expanded form of the zip files that the module represents. That was what I was trying to say. So just quickly on the major version defaults and import paths, at the top there you see a q.mod module.q file, which declares its module path. And then you can see the declared dependencies, one of which is example.com at v1, and the version specifically there of that dependency is v1.0.0. It's just a toy example. But you can then see effectively the configuration default true. That then allows us in main.q file, which is just part of the main.org module, to import example.com foo without having to specify the major version as part of the import, which would otherwise be required. Now, the main use case here is existing code, because existing code, of course, does not have the major version in import paths at all. And so this will allow folks this sort of, it's a convenience aspect, but also a sort of an ease of migration aspect as well, to have this sort of major version defaulting. So that's implemented as well. Yeah, so that's a number of things that have landed. That's almost all of this stuff here is, from a visible perspective, is all the progress has been made in the Qlang Q repos. So all of those CLs have landed. As we talked about, we've been fleshing out tests of all of this stuff, including end-to-end / scenario tests, whatever we want to call them, as part of this as well. We need to do a bit more tweaking of that. But that's helping us to sort of commit with confidence effectively to the Q repo to make sure we're not breaking stuff. Those scenario tests will also then, they need tweaking, as I just said. They will also form the basis of documentation as we write that out, ready for sort of the announcement of the example of the experiment. So we're not live with the experiment officially yet. The code is there. So if people happen to be picking up what is in Qlang Q and running it themselves, great. You will fail to interact with the central registry for now. But if you want to use your own OCI server, that would be absolutely fine. But as we'll talk a bit more about the next steps from our perspective at the end of this session. Daniel, can I hand over to you for a GitHub-based... Oh, actually, no, let's just do a quick refresher That's the first slide. I forgot about this. We covered this slide last time. For the central registry, again, just to stress that, if you've got a company registry, this does not apply. But for the central registry, for phase one, we are including GitHub-based auth. And what does that actually mean? Much like Tailscale and others, will be using GitHub for Auth-N. So we're not going to be an identity provider ourselves. That's all round a good thing from a security perspective, but also it means we can then add support for things like GitLab, etc. later on, and just other authentication providers, much like Tailscale and others do. For phase one, we are also, yeah, absolutely. I don't want to store any passwords. For phase one, we are also only allowing people to publish GitHub-based modules. This is just to limit the scope of the experiment to start with, and GitHub seems like a fairly reasonable place, fairly reasonable restriction in that respect, because there's a good number of people who are based on GitHub, or at least have GitHub accounts. What that then allows us to do, as we said, is experiment as well with public and private modules as well. Now, for public modules, that's actually I should have included the flow diagram, Daniel, as part of that shows. Unfortunate. I'll perhaps do that in the published slides if it's sufficiently polished. Everyone will be required to authenticate, but not everybody will need to install the GitHub app for AuthZ. And the AuthZ GitHub app will be required if, in a number of scenarios, principally if you have private modules and you are the owner of that module, then you will need the AuthZ app, unless it's just you consuming your own private module, which is a bit of an edge case in that scenario. That also, if you want to have people collaborate with you publishing modules, you'll need the AuthZ app. And in the general case of all organization-based modules, public or private, you'll need to install it as well. So we've created a nice little flow diagram that sort of answers when do I need to install the AuthZ app, because it's not fiddly per se, it's just awkward to explain it, and I hopefully didn't stumble across the explanation there, but the flow diagram just makes it a whole load clearer. So we will publish that along with the documentation for the experiment as well. Daniel, I think I've been talking enough. Do you want to take over?
Yep, I'll just share my screen, 1 sec. Cool. So I will demo something that landed in master not long ago. So let's see. Yeah, it's a hidden login command. So this is not really ready to be used, but it does work, and I will show that now. So locally, I've got a Postgres database running, and I've got Tailscale exposing my machine under Blue Toad. That's just the random string Tailscale gave me. And that I've got a version of our central registry running locally that does auth with GitHub for the Auth-N and AuthZ, but also is an auth server itself to do the device flow with Command Q. So if I run this, this effectively does a device flow between Command Q and this local registry that I've got running. And it's a similar flow to, for example, if you've used the GitHub GH CLI to do a login or the Tailscale CLI to do a login. It's the same device flow where you effectively say from the command line, start the flow, and then you're meant to open a page on your browser to effectively log in from the browser and confirm that you want to authorize this device for a token. So if I open that URL with the user code, I'm not logged in right now. So I'm effectively showing what the flow would be if I've never logged in to the registry before. So I log in via GitHub. I need to authorize the auth app. It doesn't have an icon, and it's called just q.works auth-n, but that's just in terms of polish. The only things that it asks for is read-only access to see what orgs you're a member of, and this is just in terms of UX, to be able to make suggestions on installing the AuthZ app. And it also asks to see your email addresses for the account, to just so that we can have some contact information. But aside from that, it doesn't ask for anything else. So authorized, redirected back. And again, this is the web UI is a to-do, but it does work.
Yeah, just to confirm, Daniel is not working on the web UI.
So the way the device flow works is that the client keeps polling every in our implementation, it's every 5 seconds. So the next time it polls after I've authorized on the browser, then the access token is there. This is not completed because this access token needs to be persisted. All I do for now is just print it out. And if you look at the implementation that's in master, you can see the to-dos here. I just printed, but we ought to actually store it and use it later. And there's also other UX polish bits, like actually opening your browser if there's one installed in your machine, but just to-dos. And the last thing I will mention is that the device flow with auth is an RFC, but the endpoints that you configure the client with to actually begin and perform this device flow, they're not really specified by the RFC. They're left up to the user, to the implementer. And each provider like GitHub, Google, Microsoft, they have their own different endpoints. For now, we do hard code the ones that we chose for our implementation of this auth RFC. But I've left a to-do here, if anybody wants to take a look, it's in master, about querying a well-known path that is in a different RFC called, if it loads today.
Well, Richard is his character is asleep, which sort of suggests that the demo is taking too long.
I'll just finish by saying that there is a different RFC that says you can obtain authorization server metadata, such as where these endpoints are via this well-known path. So we do have a to-do for implementing this on the client. And then effectively QLogin is not going to be just for the central registry or our implementation of this auth RFC. It supposedly will work with any server that also implements this metadata/discovery endpoint. Hopefully that was clear enough.
Perfect. From my perspective, Richard, Tony, I'm assuming you're just going to jump in with any questions if you have any, so please do. I will share my...
I was holding that to the end.
Oh, you're kind. Please
I do
don't.
have one now.
Go for
I'm
it.
thinking of Keycloak is maybe it's something you can use to test locally, but it could, you get to set your own domains, and this would be a way I might test this .well-known auth lookup for endpoints.
I'm sorry, I have to admit, I just missed the point you were making there as to what this would help cover. Big fun.
Yeah, I was going to ask in general before about what's the experience like logging into like something else,
Mhm.
and I guess this is partially answering that, and then I think
But by
Keycloak,
something else,
everyone
you mean something other than the central registry, or
something besides GitHub, which well, I guess in this case also the registry. But it was like, okay, well, if you're hard coding the paths, there is this well-known
so one thing
that people use.
One thing to flag is that Daniel, who has frozen with a cat on his head, as far as my image is concerned. I don't even know whether Daniel's and the cat are still on the call. Oh no, he is still there. The one thing that QLogin is trying to do at the moment is OAuth. Now, I think there's a nuance there in that we're only intending that for now. It's very tightly scoped right now. So QLogin is really only intended to be there for the central registry for this experiment. I think there are some. There's a bigger question about how QLogin should work in other scenarios for just other OCI servers, right? Because the one thing we've deliberately done to start with is to make auth for existing OCI servers be based on the Docker config.json side of things, so that people don't have to do login. But that doesn't come, and also that allows it to work with other OCI tools as well. There's sort of multiple reasons why we've done that. So the thing that's not clear to us, and we're sort of hoping to expose via the experiment, is, well, when it maybe someone doesn't have any existing auth in Docker config.json for another OCI server, what do they want the experience to be if they're going to use Command Q? Are they expecting to be able to log in or do sort of, and that we don't have an answer for right now. So that's part of what the experiment is designed to sort of flush out. So we will say, if you are using the central registry, then use QLogin, right? But there's a gap there for other OCI servers. Well, what experience are people expecting, or is the sort of the well-trodden path for other OCI tools that people just do jam some stuff in, run some other command, and then docker config.json is populated, and then they use other tools? So yeah, open question.
Daniel, did you want to go first?
I was going to add what Paul said, which is that
Okay.
you can think of the persistence of tokens or auth as a two-layered thing. We fall back to Docker just to, for example, play nice with existing Docker registries, because we also want to support them. But the first layer where we authenticate with the central registry and also store tokens if you do keylogin is our separate token storage, you can call. But it's two-layered. And the question is, if a company has their own Docker, their own registry, if it's a Docker registry, maybe they will just do Docker login and that will work. If they're doing something that's not a Docker registry, that's more like a Q registry, then probably they want to be using Q login instead. And that's why I was hinting at this RFC that effectively makes it work with any endpoint, not just the endpoints that we chose arbitrarily.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this. Yeah, I think OAuth is nice. I had a question if it works with, like, I host images up on GHCR, but that's all. I think I pushed that via like the Docker credentials and default login and stuff like that. So one thing, if I'm thinking about G Cloud or the Google Cloud, for those not using that acronym, is we use the G Cloud auth plugin for Docker, so we aren't having to put credentials in there. It's like third party. Docker has a workflow internally where the auth works through, calls out to another program to handle the auth for it, and that's nice because I could switch between projects or registries without having to log into each one individually. For sure.
So just to be clear, sorry.
And I guess one more quick point was that I think I only brought up Keycloak in as much as that it's one OAuth and two that you can run it locally and possibly test that well-known workflow locally without having to like create all the other stuff around it, like with an actual service.
We'll definitely take that as a have that as a takeaway for us to take a look at on the Keycloak side of things. On the Google Cloud side of things, are you just? I had a question there. Are you saying you're comfortable with the way that it does delegate to?
Yeah, for sure, prefer. And actually, another point on that is that
just to be super clear, that's what we do. So because that is effectively configuration within Docker config.json, and there's actually I think already an end-to-end test around this as well. Daniel might be able to. Yeah, I'll stop talking and just let Daniel answer.
Yeah, to be clear, when I talked about we fall back to always supporting credentials from Docker config, that does include G-Cloud as well. So if that's what you mean, it does work.
Okay, you're using some library that handles Docker credentials already,
Sort
or you're
of.
just reading it yourself and seeing what auth plugin is it using?
We re-implemented the minimum we needed to effectively read the config and be able to call the credential helpers, which is not that much code.
What else? There was something else I was gonna just say. Oh, non-Docker. What about nerd control? I don't know I can't remember off the top of my head if nerd control respects Docker config, but I know in at least one place we're done with Docker. We're going with nerd control and containerd.
With what? Sorry, am I missing?
Nerd cuddle and containerd. There's 3 primary container runtime experiences now. It's Docker, nerd cuddle, and Podman. Those are the big 3 I see.
The only thing oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm done.
Sorry, there's enough lag. I thought you were done.
Yeah, I was just gonna say people are kind of got upset with Docker about some maybe not so recent now, but they decided they wanted to move away from Docker.
If there's other widespread enough authentication configuration files or state files or whatever you want to call them that are common enough, sure, we can probably add support for them as fallbacks, just like we do with Docker config. The only thing that's not worth noting with what Roger and I have been researching is that OCI in general, it's a nice set of specs for artifacts. And it does say some things about how the client and server should talk to each other in terms of scopes and tokens, but it does not say absolutely anything about how the client is meant to like store or share credentials between different clients. So we implemented the fallback for Docker config because we literally couldn't figure out, is there a better approach in terms of like playing nice with existing users? That's basically the best we could come up with.
Yeah, no, I support that approach. And I think when you look at nerdtroll, if I remember correctly, I think they use the same config file format. It's just in a different spot.
Then
Right.
So it should be pretty easy. If I'm thinking, I think Podman's similar, but I don't really use Podman, so I can't speak to that as much.
But just to be super clear, that this isn't us taking a principled position on it at all. It's what feels good enough to get the experiment off the ground, which will also give people ability to use existing tools, and indeed, as Daniel said, leverage auth from existing tools. Here's our answer. Please just, and we'll see the issues in a second, but if there's other stuff, just let us know, and we can sort of maybe have an issue where we gather additional auth stuff, and then off the back of that sort of work out as part of the experiment which things we prioritize next. But as Daniel said, we can link to that separately. We did just implement a very light sort of auth part of OCI, because OCI is silent on auth. And there's a sort of the de facto standard, although it sounds like some people would disagree with my choice of phrasing there, that docker config.json is the quotes standard for auth. So we've just implemented that. But if we need to add more or make it sort of clear that it's not a standard, happy to tweak it, because we don't hold that strongly.
I mean, I don't know if I call it standard, but it is widely used. For sure.
I'm not trying to take a position by saying standard.
Yeah. No, I'm mostly just trying to paint some broader strokes to provide more like, here's what I'm doing.
That's great.
One question. So it's going to only work with GitHub. Does that mean it? I saw that registry was like interpolated in the string. Does that mean I will be able to, if I had a private GitHub registry, OCI registry, would I be able to push something to that or publish something to that?
Yeah, let me just be super clear when we say GitHub. Right, this slide is helps to frame that, right? The only constraint on it being GitHub-based modules is for using the central registry.
Well, I'm wondering if that is the case, because then, because I saw that the registry was pointing there.
If you want to use a different registry, then whatever you like.
Well, a different private registry on GitHub is what I'm wondering if it's supported, because GHCR.io is going to use GitHub auth, and it's already on GitHub, so that if you're doing GitHub auth, then they could support any registry, public or private, on GitHub generally versus just the central one. Because I'm asking because I saw in that code, brief glimpse of the code, that the registry was like added to 2 strings, and if that is a variable, or if the registry name is also hard coded in that login workflow currently.
Daniel, please, if that's you with your hand up, I'm just trying to add someone else to the call. Please go for it.
I think maybe because I skimmed past some of my terminal windows, maybe it wasn't very clear, but that addition of strings was literally just q_registry, right? So that can be whatever you want. But you will...
Yeah, okay, that's what I was hoping. So I guess I'm just wondering if in this first phase, will we be able to like test and in the experiment, can we try using our own private registries?
100%.
As long as they're under GitHub, just so that we can start doing that stuff.
They can be. Sorry, this is where we are. On my this part of the demo is slightly confusing things, and apologies. I can see exactly where this is coming from. There's effectively 2 parts to this the experiment, and I'll deliberately name them in this order. 1, I want to use my own OCI registry. You can do whatever you like there, whether it's a GitHub, OCI registry, Google, your own local one, whatever. You set Q registry to be that host name, and you're off. You're responsible for auth, but you can use command Q with that. If you're the second part is that there's going to be a central registry available, and that will be the default for the Q registry environment variable, just so that we, for the purposes of the experiment, we have something just like Go has a default for the Go proxy, something useful to test. If you are using the central registry, then you need to authenticate with the central registry via OAuth, and that's GitHub-based OAuth. If you are publishing to the central registry, then you need to, then you will only be able to publish GitHub-based modules. But that restriction around GitHub auth, GitHub-based modules only exists for the central registry. If you are using your own OCI registry, i.e. the first part of the experiment, you can do whatever you like.
And let me see if I can repeat this back.
Sorry, we've confused it.
See if I'm like understanding. So in the phase 1 experiment, if you have an OCI registry, that will be supported via the Q registry environment variable. And if I've set up the Docker config file to do that like authentication stuff, it should just work in this phase 1 experiment. Then if I'm trying to, if I want to publish to, or if I want to interact in any way with the central registry on GitHub, I have to do Q login. And if I want to push to that registry, then I also have to install the GitHub app.
Maybe. It depends if it's a personal module.
Private versus, is that where the public versus private comes in?
I wish I'd included that flow diagram. If it's if it's a personal module, i.e. under your personal GitHub space, then you don't. Doesn't matter whether it's public or private, because we know who you are. We know the namespace, so we can sidestep that. So if you hold it like that, if whenever we can't know if you control the namespace or not, then we need the authz app, as it were. Which
also includes public versus private.
Correct.
Publishing to the central registry. Cool. Yeah, So just to confirm that in this first experiment, we'll be able to play with private modules.
Yes.
And private registries.
Yeah, yes, we needed a better term than private registries because, of course, they may be publicly accessible. But yes, I get what you mean by private registries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I think this highlights one important thing. The lack of documentation around what the experiment will actually support, but also a lack of clarity around what we supported day one. Please don't fear, that is top of our list before we announce anything. But for those who would like to sort of join in, and Tony and Richard have both sort of expressed interest in kicking the tires on this early, we will make this clear to you when we do sort of like an onboarding session or whatever, and answer any questions, because that will also help us to flush out any issues that we, or gaps effectively with any documentation that will exist at that point in time as well. Cool. Okay. In which case, sorry for the confusion there. Daniel, are you all done? I think we are on the demo side of things. Great. Okay. So we have started creating issues for modules. We've created a label, and I've imaginatively just called that modules for now. There are only 2 issues for now, so they can be the highlights for today. One of them was created off the back of an exchange that I had with Tony last night, who just had a quick look at the implementation as it stands at the moment. Basically, QMod init today, you're allowed to pass no arguments to it, but in a modules world, that isn't particularly useful. And this issue captures that, where here you can sort of see we're getting set up for actually some sort of modules-based work, setting these environment variables. Then we're running QMod init with no arguments, and then QMod tidy. Now, if this is my code below here, this should succeed because I'm not actually doing anything that requires tidying. However, it fails because it fails on qmod tidy saying the module path has no major version. Now that's not particularly good, not least because we shouldn't require a major version if it is just a main module that we won't actually ever publish anywhere, for one. But also the module path being empty shouldn't actually be an issue necessarily itself. But also it sort of suggests that, well, why did we even support empty module paths in the first place? Well, that was just a very early on decision, I think, in order to ease the migration when modules first landed, which is a very long time ago. So it feels like the right thing to do in this situation is to actually just do what Go does. I.e., it's an error to have an empty module path. But you can do sort of single word versions like go mod init test, for example, or something like that. That's totally legit. Or go mod init without arguments actually has some heuristics for determining what the module path should be in any case. Now, whilst we might not land those heuristics day one, it feels like it's probably the right thing to do if we've enabled the modules experiment to make it an error to not provide a path, and then add the heuristics later on to allow you to avoid providing. But anyway, this issue captures that. So please feel free to add any thoughts around what the experience should be there. Thanks, Tony, for flagging that one. Another one here is we're currently using zip archives as the means of storing or compressing and then creating an archive. That's the word I was after, for representing a module. Daniel sort of flagged that Go is adding support for, I don't know how to pronounce this. How should I pronounce that? ZSTD?
ZSTD?
ZSTD? ZS? I don't know.
I always say Z standard, maybe. I don't really say this often, but yes,
Go is adding
token standard.
So Go's adding support for that thing that Tony just said, of their release archives. So Daniel basically flagging, because we've got room to make design changes at this stage, maybe we should just bite the bullet and do that for the module archives as well instead of zip. Please feel free to just chime in on this issue with anything that you might consider. Daniel's added a couple of points to consider. Please just respond with any others that you might sort of think are going to be relevant for this sort of discussion as well. So that ends the highlights of the modules issues so far. We will just start creating those, and as we find issues ourselves, that's why I've started creating these. It just felt like a good opportunity to do that. So we'll start creating more. So next steps, we're going to well, I suppose the most important thing from the next steps perspective is with the holiday/Christmas period coming up, a number of folks on our side are going to be taking some time off. I need to focus on LSP for a few days as well. So we'll sort of be taking a bit of a break modules wise. But in and around that, people taking breaks and things, this is the plan. Finish landing initial changes in QLangQ. Reminder, everything experimental. It's still, everything will be guarded by Q experiment equals modules. Complete the central registry implementation, including the initial implementation, including a front end. Expand our scenario tests. They will form as the next point suggests, form the basis of documentation for the modules experiment. Update the modules proposal docs to V3 to include explicit mention of the tweaks since V2, just so that we're very, very clear. Invite early testers, get feedback from them. Richard, Tony, thanks for agreeing to be part of that. And then once we're sort of sufficiently comfortable, announce the modules experiment so that people can more widely at that point just start kicking the tires on this stuff and have documentation that they can look at as part of that. Any questions, points at this stage?
Just on that last bullet point on the previous slide, would you cut a 0.8 for the module experiment before if the performance stuff is not quite ready?
Very good question. The last community call, we talked about how we've effectively decoupled the performance stuff from any specific release because
Okay,
it
I
was
missed that point.
yeah
of
no
that
because it was
discussion.
basically if we coupled it to a release, it would become a blocker, and or we just keep bumping the version number
The
as to
can
when the
down the
performance
road,
stuff. Yeah, exactly. So instead, Marcel, I think he's just landing. Well, he's just pushing up a very, very long stack of changes that does a decent amount of the groundwork for the performance stuff. But it's now decoupled from a specific release. So when
Okay.
we say the performance stuff, we will start communicating change, because the performance stuff now splits into two pieces. Marcel's sort of got a new implementation of the evaluator. Let's call that the new evaluator, that will coexist with the current, which will be called old evaluator. Again, you'll have to enable the new evaluator if that's what you want, as and when it makes sense to actually do that. As Marcel is making changes for the new evaluator, there are actually performance fixes and other fixes for the current, i.e. old evaluator. So they will start landing in releases that come out. But again, the new evaluator will only be enabled by some sort of environment variable. At some point later down the line, we'll say, yep, we're very comfortable that actually the new evaluator is as good, if not better, than the old evaluator. We'll flip the default, i.e. you have to enable the old evaluator and the new one will become the default. But we're now not being specific as to what version that will happen in, because otherwise it was just getting a bit awkward, because we're going to need to keep churning out versions for the module stuff, plus the WebAssembly stuff, which is going to start landing pretty soon as well. Aram, I think, is in the process of pushing up a stack of changes there as well. So we didn't want to be sort of penned in by, oh, well, the performance stuff is reserved for this version. We're going to just start churning out releases now with the most meaningful strategy on patches and minor versions that we can. And then just take it from there. And Marcel will separately communicate when performance stuff is landing in those versions, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I support that. Well, for sure.
Great. Yeah, so we're just going to press on with whatever releases we need to do for the module stuff and the WebAssembly stuff. And the LSP, sorry, well, because the LSP will start to influence version numbers as well. Richard.
I saw Tony starting to mess with the experiment. Is that something that do you support currently pushing to internal OCI repos that we self-host?
Yep. I should actually, maybe I can do this here by going
Live edit slides.
No, I'm not. I'm definitely not going to live edit the slides. I will mess that up. Something chronic.
I thought you might just add the diagram. I like that was what you're going for.
Internal E2E. First data script. Daniel can shout if I'm going to the wrong place here. But
yeah. So you see the gcloud auth docker there at the top that effectively runs. It expects a token from gcloud auth docker, right? And then the rest of this test is effectively with key registry pointed at a Docker registry from gcloud, then do a q mod publish, and then fetch the module. So it does work.
Nice. So this is a demonstration. Yeah, this is this comment is the key bit here. That command sets those environment variables. So Q registry is explicitly not set here. So if you set it to your own OCI registry, and as Tony said earlier on, you did your own auth, etc., then this would work as well.
And you can see the Docker config at the bottom that says credential helpers gcloud, because this does require gcloud to actually.
Oh, there you go, Tony. Yeah.
I was also noticing the Docker config environment variable on line 6, which people put those config files in weird places.
It's only because these tests, they don't use a home directory, so otherwise it would just fail. So we just put it in a place.
I know about that issue.
Well, you saw in my slides actually earlier on. Where is that? Let's go back here. There. No. Where did I do that? Did I delete that slide? Oh. Okay. I'm just talking rubbish then. I can't remember where I demoed that. I set home explicitly to... Apologies, I must be thinking about something else. You can set home and then it will work. But just to be clear, if anyone's testing this stuff right now, that's at your own risk, yada, yada, yada. It is very probably fragile is the best term to use right now. So use at your own risk, etc., etc.
You mentioned there's some cache in this experiment. Mod cache, is that like the way Go does a cache is in the home directory, under like dot cache or whatever it is. You can configure it. Is that what this is? And then you maybe just copy it, like actually just recursively copy to the actual q.mod package subdir.
So the implementation, the design is not literally, the code is not literally copy pasted, but the design is extremely similar to what Go does for the mod cache. The location is not exactly the same. We put it under your user cache directory /q. And then when we extract the module zips, it's not extracted inside your qmod, it's extracted inside the same cache directory, if that makes sense.
Oh,
so
is the loader now supporting that directory?
does the... This definitely works from command Q. If you call directly qload, I think it's not implemented yet, because the only thing is the qload config API. We need to hook that up into the Go API, but it definitely works from command Q. And we will work with qload. It's just a matter of, I think Roger hasn't gotten to it yet.
So I was under the impression this would work via qload, but then I might be wrong on that.
I'm like 50-50. I honestly ended up going, but it will work soon. If it doesn't work already, you can try.
Yeah. The one thing I was just about to say is I can't actually point to a test which would tell us the answer to this, right, which is effectively either a gap in the testing or the fact that it's not implemented and hence there's not a test. So with all of this stuff, we are... we're helping ourselves by writing good tests because it just enables us to make fairly significant changes and know whether we've broken stuff or not. And then we can just be publishing new versions of Q, and people should be able to effectively test with tip once we quotes go live if they want to remain on the bleeding edge of things. But the central registry as well, during the experiment, we will just likely just continually deploy the central registry, just so that if there are bugs, etc., people get the fixes as quick as possible as well. So the caching, yeah, if it works today, great. If it doesn't, Tony, is probably one of the top to-dos in what is there already. But please feel free to kick the tires on it.
Oh, that's exciting to hear. It's nice.
Yeah. Roger actually gave a demo of... Did he do the demo of the caching stuff on the last call? No. When did he do a demo of the caching stuff? My brain is fried.
I think the caching stuff only landed last week, so I don't think we have done any public demo.
Okay, well, there we go then. My brain is all over the shop. I've got lots of presents to deliver, as you can tell. Cool. Was there anything else that I don't think we had any other slides? No, because we were on the questions slide. Any other questions? Great. Otherwise, we'll keep updating in the modules channel, especially on where we're at with things. Tony, Richard will ping you when we're sort of at a logical point where it makes sense to give you. That logical point will probably be where we can give you a demo sort of end to end that includes the central registry, because we're needing to do a number of auth bits that then affect command Q, and we're prioritizing that right now just so that we can unblock a few other things. So if you want to get your fingers burnt by actually trying things with a private OCI registry right now, you should be able to do that as that end-to-end test confirms. But otherwise, feel free to just hold off and we can walk you through bits and pieces as well. Anyone joining this call or watching the recording is just going to...
I've been having a hard time keeping a straight face through this. I finally figured out what you guys are doing, where you found it. It just occurred to me like, oh, it's somewhere in here.
Oh,
Like,
Daniel fell off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Drifted off the screen entirely.
This one works really well
Otherwise,
for me.
what is the date? We've got the date for the next one as being the 4th of January. We will just see where we're at on the 4th of January. As in, there's a lot of people off between now and the 4th of January. So it might be that we logically haven't moved significantly far enough to have a call. If that is the case, it will make sense to potentially shift our cycle to start on the 11th and then have every 2 weeks from there. So we'll keep updated. But apologies, it might be a bit of a last minute postponement if we shift it. But I'll let you know. Or we will let you know, I should say. Great. I hope everyone has a good break, holiday, if they have plans, and we'll come back in modules ready in what'll probably be 2024. Daniel is literally drifting away. Thanks, everyone.